What's up, everyone? How's it going? I kind of lost my voice. Those of us who joined us on the last stream know that I was at the national tournament for Division III wrestling. It was a good time. Some of you probably know that I lost one of my jobs this year under very strange circumstances and amidst a lot of reactionaries emailing my job and then calling for me to be fired. So I don't know how much of an influence that played, but I'm sure it did. But thankfully, I was able to hop over and coach for another school for the remainder of the season. And it happened to be the school that my brother was wrestling at. So it was really fun to coach him, but that's why my voice is gone. I've also been on a bunch of planes and eating a bunch of junk food, which I'm not used to doing. But, well, I'm used to eating quite a bit of junk food. I can't lie. Hey, Eddie, nice to see you, comrade. Nice to see you, too. Crack Mama James. Did I grab a pick? I stood up to grab a pick, and I might have... Nope, I grabbed it. Glad to hear it turned out well enough. Thank you. Yes, my brother ended up getting fourth in the country at D3, which he's not happy with. He wanted to get first, but he did very well. I was very proud of him. Happy to be there. Dang, I'm not sounding good with my rhythm playing today. I'm gonna have to stick with the finger style. Stick with what you know, huh? Greetings from El Salvador, comrade. Oh, very cool. Greetings. Thank you for being with us, comrade. Hello from the Communist Party of Canada. Hello, Jacob. Wow, we got lots of countries represented today. Shout out to the Canadian comrades. Shout out to the comrades from El Salvador. What's the movie about El Salvador that portrays the Civil War, or the war where the U.S. was backing a bunch of extremists? Voces Inocentes, innocent voices. Yeah, Voces Inocentes. Yeah, my dad's a Spanish teacher, and he shows that movie for class. It's a crazy movie. Voces Inocentes. Yeah, you know. Is it a good portrayal? I don't know. All right, that's enough guitar for today. Let's get into the thick of it. That was fun. Thank you for bearing with me through all that. Oh, good. Jimmy's here. Hello, Hammer and Sickle, Ed Boy. Hello, Jimmy. Jimmy, you're going to be excited about what I have planned for today's show. I hope. Or maybe you're not. But I hope you'll be excited. I figured maybe if I titled the stream Juche Necromancy, you would click on it. But Jimmy recently published a fantastic article for us on Midwestern Marks called Juche Necromancy, the Fabricated Executions in the DPRK. And this is essentially, I don't know if it's a thorough or full compilation of every instance of Juche Necromancy in history, but it's pretty close. So for those who don't know, multiple times when the U.S. media has reported that Kim Jong-un had somebody executed, oftentimes in some kind of heinous way, like watching them or making their friends watch as they die by firing squad, or like throwing people into a vat of piranhas, is legitimately one of the stories that U.S. media reported, that Jimmy discusses in this article. But this essentially goes through every time the U.S. media has usually taken a South Korean tabloid that reports on some heinous execution committed by Kim Jong-un. So like People Magazine or TMZ, basically there are similar outlets in South Korea that report these just clickbait stories that are usually, if you trace them all the way back to their source, there is no source, or the source is extremely vague. And then in a lot of instances, someone who they reported dead has showed up alive weeks, months, or a few years later. So Jimmy detailed a whole bunch of those stories here. I've put this article that he wrote in the description for today's stream. So you can click it below if you want to check it out and see what it's all about. Read it for yourself. But I just wanted to go over some of the funnier ones that he listed here and compare them to some of the stuff that I'd talked about. Obviously, I did a video recently, or a big long stream, about the North Korean defector industry, how the celebrity defectors like Yeonmi Park are groomed by South Korean intelligence, by the CIA and US NGOs, and then they basically just become celebrities while making up or parroting the most heinous stories about North Korea, like these tabloid stories or whatever else. So Yeonmi Park has been one of the most famous ones. She was literally on Andrew Schulz's podcast recently, which makes this stream that I did about it even more timely, I guess. But one of the things that I covered in my stream was a North Korean artist who was apparently shot like 60 to 90 times in front of the rest of the orchestra that they were a part of. And there's almost an identical story here in Jimmy's article about Hyun Sung-woo. I don't know if it is the exact same story that I covered, but basically all that I said in my video was that the story had no real sources, that there was essentially no real concrete evidence that this had happened at all. And then Jimmy reported that actually 8 to 9 months later, the person who was supposedly executed by firing squad in front of the orchestra resurfaced. So this is what we call Juche Necromancy, when Kim Jong-un executes people and then brings them back to life. And of course, this is only possible because of the U.S. media and their lack of journalistic integrity, and their willingness to publish anything, even if it's just some South Korean tabloid story. Which one of the best breakdowns of this that I've seen, which I think is an underrated breakdown of it, although I'm very biased.
Those are, some of the tactics. I mean, the propaganda war.
Is the video from Professor Derek Ford that we did here. So this was an interview. This is up on Spotify as well, as part of the Midwestern Marks podcast, I believe. But you can watch this on YouTube. And it's our interview with Professor Derek Ford of the Liberation School, who spent a lot of time in both North and South Korea, touring the country, talking to people, learning about their history, studying their history. So he came on our show and talked to us about everything to do with the DPRK, starting with the Korean War, or not even starting with the Korean War, starting with their anti-colonial struggle, the older history of the peninsula, how long Korea was unified before it was divided, and before the U.S. killed 20% of the Korean population with bombs. So lots of great history in here. He also talks about the current economic sanctions on Korea, which are the most stringent of any sanctions in the world, besides the ones that the U.S. keeps on Cuba. But this is an especially interesting point where he talks about the propaganda war, the defector industry, the celebrity defectors, and the way that U.S. media circulates unsourced stories from South Korean tabloids.
those are, you know, some of the tactics. I mean, the propaganda war, the economic sanctions, the political sanctions, you know, and the constant demonization and propaganda, the defector industry, which, by the way, you know, no like scholar has taken any defector testimony seriously since like 2000, you know, just because it's so unreliable. That Camp 14 book, you know, that was published and made famous, the UN star, you know, witness, fabricated his story, later admitted he fabricated it. You know, so you know, nobody takes that seriously except for the US media pretty much, you know, and they publish anything, right? I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, they published an article saying that everybody in North Korea had to get the same haircut as with Kim Jong-un, right? You know where they got that story from? A South Korean like a tabloid, you know, like a National Enquirer. They picked it up on the newswire and they didn't know who it was from, and they just ran with it, you know, and they retracted it, you know, but obviously the retractions, like, you know, in the back of the newspaper, so nobody pays attention to that. But just the fact that people would believe that shit. And I remember when I told that story once when I was in the South to people, and they were stunned. They were like, oh my God, like people believe that, you know? And I mean, these are progressive people, of course, but still they were like, that's absurd, you know? So think about the ways that we've been conditioned that the majority of the population would believe that something like that would happen. Like the government doesn't have anything better to worry about than like how people wear their hair. You know what I mean? Like they're under constant threat. So we should also include the actual military threats and the actual military interventions in the South China Sea.
So yeah, he goes on to talk about how Korea is encircled by the US and how they're under those stringent economic sanctions I mentioned. It's like, you really think their government is, you know, spending all of their time, energy, and resources enforcing that everybody wear the same haircut as Kim Jong-un? Or actually, there was one story that said that everyone had to get the same haircut. And then there was another story that said you would actually be executed if you had the same haircut. So, you know, you can't win in North Korea. You get executed no matter what haircut you have. Like, you really think this is where the government is putting their resources and energy enforcing things like this? Or building giant piranha pits for Kim Jong-un to throw people he doesn't like into them? Like, no, they're busy trying to survive, trying to run a country, you know, trying to make sure that they do have the support of their people, because people will overthrow a government if it's not, you know, if it's not serving them for a long enough period of time. So, you know, the absurdity of some of these stories. That's like one of my favorite lines in that entire podcast with Derek Ford is when he's like, South Korean people are like, Americans believe this? Are you kidding me? Like, just think about the logic of it. It's like that Yeonmi Park story I covered in the live stream about her, where she said that North Korean people or people in North Korean hospitals eat rats. The hospitals are just filled with rats, and that's all that people eat. But then when people die in the hospitals, they just get stacked in a room, and then the rats eat them. And then the other patients eat the rats, and it's just an endless cycle of rat and human eating. Like, this isn't physically possible. This is not possible. And if someone just came up and told you this story on the street, you wouldn't believe it, right? But then if you look at the sourcing for a lot of these stories that U.S. media reports as fact, it's literally like, you know, a defector said this. Somebody said this on Here I Am Coming to See You, or whatever it's called, this TV show in South Korea that features defectors and pressures them to tell the most insane stories. So some of the outlets who published this story that Jimmy talked about here, about Hyun Sung-wol, the orchestra conductor and musician who was apparently murdered by firing squad. You have Business Insider, fairly mainstream outlet, fairly quote unquote respected outlet, you know, not like New York Times or anything that people would take totally serious, or that most people take totally serious, but still fairly large corporate media outlet. You also have Slate.com, again, an outlet, you know, not a super not like one of the most respected outlets in the country, but one with a lot of money. You know, one with a nice production value, and one that demands respect or has this air of authority, that a lot of media outlets with a lot of money and a high production value kind of inherently have with people. And they just report this stuff over and over and over and over again until most Americans have this general idea about the DPRK that's just ridiculous. It's just absurd and based not in reality, but in this, comic book level understanding of, how this country works and how their politics and economy work, what their history is like, what their political ideology is. It's completely schizophrenic, someone says. I don't know if that's the word, but it's completely divorced from reality. Maybe that's what schizophrenic means, technically, but this is really funny too. The first thing that this Smithsonian Magazine article says, which Smithsonian is, usually when you hear Smithsonian, you probably think of the Smithsonian Museum, but you think of educational, right? Like they wouldn't just be pulling stuff out of their ass and reporting it, but North Korea reportedly executed pop singers and dancers. This is the pop singers and dancers who showed up alive a few months later. And they say, so far, only one South Korean outlet has reported on the latest possible atrocity. And unfortunately, it will probably remain that way. Oh, yes, the horrible authoritarian censorship of the communist DPRK, of the socialist workers' government of the DPRK and the Workers' Party. They don't want to publish fake stories about their own country. They don't want to publish a fake story claiming that somebody was executed who's actually alive. Though the censorship of socialism, how terrible. Like, come on. This is absurd. So that just gives you an example. And it's, like I said, maybe these aren't the most respected or even the most mainstream outlets all the time. But a lot of times you do get stories like the haircut story reported by BBC and a lot of more respected journalistic outlets that you would think wouldn't be making ridiculous mistakes and publishing ridiculous stories and having no journalistic integrity. But even when it's not those outlets, even when it's just like People Magazine and you're walking through the grocery store every day and you see People Magazine has some weird story about Kim Jong-un feeding people to piranhas or whatever, it creates a general sense amongst Americans, like I said, that the DPRK is just crazy. Kim Jong-un is just running everything. But another one of the stories that our buddy Jimmy covered here is Kim Kyung-hui. I don't know how this is pronounced, but someone who was reported in a 2015 CNN article to have been executed by Kim Jong-un. Is this the one that he said was his aunt? I'm not sure. But CNN is a very, very mainstream outlet that was reporting this pure unsourced nonsense. Let's see here. Where's the one of his aunt? This one's Kim Kyung-hui. Oh, this is the one. Okay, I had the right one. So this is apparently in 2014, Kim Jong-un murdered or executed his own aunt, or aunt, however you say it. I don't know what part of the country you're in, or if you're not even in the country. I'm in the U.S., if you didn't know. But later, Kim Jong-un's aunt, who he apparently executed, showed up on a TV show, completely fine. What do you know? Juche Necromancy strikes again. Kim Jong-un takes life away just to give it back. Either that or U.S. corporate media completely made this up. So, again, this stemmed from a South Korean tabloid whose sources for the article was a defector testimony, I believe, or one of the other ones was sources from China. That was all it said. It was just sources from China, as if that's concrete evidence. But reported by CNN World, very, very serious reporting here from Paula Hancock's the CNN journalist, showing a lot of journalistic integrity by publishing a story that there was no source for, and claiming that a woman was executed before she showed up 8 to 9 months later on TV. So that's the power of communism there. You can literally bring people back to life who U.S. corporate media claims have died. And what's so funny, like, this story isn't entirely related to the execution of Kim Jong-un's aunt, Kim Kyung-hui, but it just shows how disconnected from reality and how not based in concrete evidence and facts the U.S. reporting is on the DPRK. Because this article says, is Kim Jong-un's aunt, Kim Kyung-hui, calling the shots in North Korea? Is she actually the one in charge deciding everything that happens, and Kim Jong-un is just a puppet? But then, another outlet reports 2 years later or whatever that she's actually executed by Kim Jong-un. So she's not calling the shots, and none of this is sourced at all. And it's like, for those of us who want to do serious political analysis and economic analysis of what's going on in the DPRK, and what they're doing to take care of or try and take care of their people and try and construct socialism and combat US imperialism and, the history of their country and what really happened with the Korean War. For those of us who are trying to have a real serious conversation about the DPRK, this stuff just seems so absurd, and it poisons the well so much. It makes it impossible to have a serious discussion because you have to break through walls of propaganda whenever you talk to people about Korea. They literally see it as a comic book because of all these conflicting, baseless stories from U.S. media that all have the same general idea: North Korea bad, the DPRK bad. So the theme of this video is one, that Juche Necromancy is real and it brings people back to life, but two, that the U.S. corporate media narrative and even U.S. entertainment media's narratives gives Americans this general sense of North Korea being evil and being some crazy country where they're all just, under the iron rule of one man or a handful of people. When in reality, our country is much closer to that with the dominance of finance capital and bankers and multinationals and the rest of them. But it makes it impossible to have serious debates or serious discussions about the DPRK and diplomacy, which is, how a lot, Americans look at geopolitics in general, or how propaganda teaches us to look at geopolitics in general. Other countries aren't, just entities or nations trying to take care of their people with their own interests and their own goals and their own things that they want. Other countries are comic book villains who kill their own people for fun and, throw their people's puppies in incinerators just because they want to. And that's other governments. And the people are just too stupid. They don't have as much freedom as America. So they just take it, It's ridiculous. And, it's disgusting too, the lack of journalistic integrity. You have these like mainstream media journalists, and the gray zone guys are always, laughing at this and mocking these people. But you have like these mainstream journalists who climb the career ladder of political journalism. And it's like the higher up you go, the more unserious you get, or the more you want to make it in journalism, the more bullshit you have to publish and circulate. It works the opposite is how it should. And these folks pretend to be serious journalists when in reality they're just pure propagandists publishing what they must know is nonsense. If they have any kind of journalistic integrity, they have to know that these stories don't have any sources. But here's BBC reporting. CNN was wrong about that actually, because the first Kim Jong-un's aunt, who he apparently killed, reappeared 6 years later. Juche Necromancy. It never fails. Unbelievable. That's the power of Marxism. Marxism combined with Korean nationalism. And actually, if you Google it, Kim Jong-un has had pretty much all of his uncles and aunts executed. Not only did he have that aunt executed who showed up 6 months later, but her husband, and another uncle of his. No sources for any of these, of course. But so the story that Jimmy ends with, and you've heard me mention this a few times in this segment, the story that he ends his article with, that again is sourced in the description here, is this claim that Kim Jong-un went full James Bond villain and dumped one of his enemies in a tank full of piranhas as a form of execution. So again, the DPRK, who's under these stringent economic sanctions and who had to really go through a hard time and find a way to become self-sustainable, and find a way to produce enough food and necessary goods for their people to survive after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Only China as a trading partner, and the U.S. blocking off trade with the rest of the world using their military and sanctions and control of the global financial system. So even, in the process of saving their resources and rationing their resources to try and take care of their people in the face of horrible imperialist economic warfare, the DPRK also took the time to build a piranha tank so Kim Jong-un can throw people he doesn't like into it, and he can watch them be eaten by piranhas, which is, it's got to be more satisfying for him. So just think about how poorly all of these articles are sourced, and then think how likely is it that Kim Jong-un and the Korean government went to the effort of building a piranha tank to throw people in. And there's an insane amount of Western news outlets who publish this story as if it's true. Like, it's insane. It's mostly from the UK, which I guess, maybe because it sounds like James Bond. So people in the UK will be interested in a story that makes Kim Jong-un sound like a James Bond villain. Like, you have the Daily Mail UK. You have the Irish Post, which obviously isn't the UK, but same area. You have the Mirror UK. You have the Metro UK. All of these outlets reporting an absurd story that the leader of another country is so crazy that he throws people in vats of piranhas to have them eaten like a literal James Bond villain. And there's no source, there's no concrete evidence. It's just pulled out of their butts. This is journalism. This is journalism in a developed capitalist country, and it's not just the US. It's the UK as well, and in other European countries. But of course, there was a U.S. outlet who reported this. I don't even know what
a way to
it is. Tomo News. Anyone know what Tomo News is? They did a whole video about this.
Go. It appears. What a way to go. It appears that North Korea's Kim Jong-un has decided to go full-out Bond villain by having one of his generals offed by tossing him into a piranha-filled fish tank. According to the Daily Star, Fats sent down the order after the general was accused of plotting a coup. The Daily Star reported that the giant fish tank was built inside Ryongsong residence, one of Kim's presidential palaces, after the dictator ordered his underlings to come up with some new ways of execution.
And the other thing is, the U.S. has been keeping the DPRK under sanctions. The U.S. killed 70% of their population. The U.S. did everything they could to destroy North Korea while boosting South Korea after they divided the country and occupied the South and installed a fascist dictator. Right? So we know that the U.S. wants to overthrow the North Korean government. We know they want to overthrow the DPRK and have access to their resources and labor and markets. So we know that the U.S. has a history of doing coups and real regime change efforts. So there are efforts, there are things that need to be done in the DPRK to defend from coups, to protect from coups, to stop spying, to stop U.S. infiltration and the destruction of their country or the overthrowing of their people's sovereignty. So they portray Kim Jong-un as this, leader of the Game of Thrones, sitting upon the throne. And this is how they portray anybody who doesn't give access to their country's resources and labor to the U.S. or Western multinationals. Any country who doesn't allow themselves to be dominated or crushed under the boot of Western multinationals is this evil dictator winning the Game of Thrones. Same thing they do with Stalin. Same thing they do with Fidel. And really, it goes back to the more successful a leader in a country are in building socialism and protecting from imperialism, the more that the propagandists and the Western finance capitalists are going to make them out to be evil, crazy comic book villains.
Looks like the general's arms and torso were introduced to some knives before the meet and greet with the piranhas. Well, more like eat and greet. The Daily Star reported that sources said it was unclear if the general succumbed because of the fish, his wounds, or drowning. Kim's soup.
What's this animation? What's ironic and terrible is because of the U.S. sanctions, they probably don't have, like fried chicken and giant cheese wheels that Kim Jong-un can just eat all the time. Although they, since that time in the 90s after the Soviet Union's collapse, when North Korea was under dire economic circumstances, they've really improved and become more self-sufficient, which is due to their own efforts for sure, due to socialist economic planning and collective farming and the industrialization of agriculture and socialist production in North Korea and the DPRK, but also due to the growth of China. The socialist economic planning in China and their efforts to develop and build up their allies around the world, which of course includes the DPRK. And if we're being honest, if we're being realistic, the DPRK wouldn't have been able to survive without China. It was necessary for their survival with the U.S. sanctions and whatnot. So good stuff, though. So thank you to Jimmy for that article. As I said multiple times, it is linked in the description below or above if you're watching on Facebook. Check that out. Check out our other video about Yeonmi Park, and definitely check out our video with Derek Ford, the podcast with Professor Derek Ford. That is a really good one. If you want another source on the North Korean defector industry, check out Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang. This has sort of become like the quintessential source for learning about the defector industry and the propaganda, which of course is why it's deemed inappropriate by YouTube. And you got to say you're 18 or whatever to watch it. But this basically shows how the defector industry works, shows how the South Korean intelligence agency, which is basically a cutout of the CIA, that was, armed supported and really controlled by the CIA for years. How they basically broker people, offer people in North Korea money to come to South Korea and say that it's much freer. You'll have all this money, all this freedom. It'll be great, even though we know the economic conditions in South Korea for working people are terrible, which is why we're seeing movies like Squid Game and Parasite come out of South Korea now. But anyways, these brokers will offer people in North Korea money, say, come here. And then, there are these tabloid stories, or there are these tabloids that will pay you for crazy stories. And there's also a TV show called, I can't remember what it's called, like Now on My Way, Coming to Meet You or something like that. But it's a TV show that will give defectors money or have defectors come on and tell their stories. So after these people leave the DPRK, a place where, the government will give you a job where your basic needs will always be taken care of, essentially, as long as you work, although they don't have the same level of consumerism and wealth outside, or that exists outside of North Korea. So after these people are tricked by the South Korean intelligence agency to leave that kind of socialist collective economy, they end up in the ruthless trickle-down world of neoliberal capitalism, and they're incentivized to tell as crazy stories as they can so that they can make money, selling these stories to tabloids or going on this TV show. It's like Here I Am Coming to Meet You or something. We should look it up. South Korean defector TV show. Now on My Way to Meet You. That's what it's called. So a lot of these defectors, after they get brokered and tricked into leaving, they're incentivized to just badmouth the DPRK as much as they can to try and get picked up by Western NGOs or libertarian think tanks like the ones who fund Yeonmi Park, this TV show, because it's a way to make income. And now if you look at Yeonmi Park, the most successful defector, like her whole income is tied to just talking crap about the DPRK, justifying U.S. regime change efforts against the DPRK. I just searched Andrew Schultz. I meant to search Andrew Schultz, Yeonmi Park, but I mean, look how famous she is now, too. She's completely rich, living an elaborate, wealthy lifestyle in the U.S., just going around doing podcasts and speaking engagements. and it's all made up. But there are so many who don't end up like Yeonmi Park and who don't have the success of her and who aren't boosted by the defector industry and these NGOs and the South Korean intelligence agency, like these people who are interviewed in Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang, who were tricked by brokers into leaving their home country, into leaving the DPRK, and regret it and realize, that capitalism is ruthless and it doesn't take care of them like the economy and the government, the Workers' Party and the DPRK does. And, the imperialist capitalists are liars who are trying to destroy the DPRK and make them look like comic book villains. So these are two of the defectors. And then this is a lawyer who goes after the South Korean intelligence agency and who goes after people who trick people into leaving the DPRK, goes after these brokers. But, it's tough because for years in South Korea, it was illegal to say good things about the DPRK or to criticize the government. Like the U.S. quite literally installed a fascist dictatorship because nobody wanted to support Syngman Rhee, this U.S.-backed fascist dictator. So the DPRK, the North Koreans, were just wiping or going through the peninsula, liberating more and more places. And when they were about to liberate the whole place, that's when the U.S. intervened and, bombed every building in North Korea over 2 stories tall into dust and killed 20% of their population so that they could really occupy the South and place this fascist dictator in power who then banned people from criticizing him or talking good about the DPRK. So yeah, wild the perception versus the reality that most people have. Truly. Love you, Eddie. Keep enlightening us. Well, thank you. I'm trying. I'm glad you feel enlightened. Eddie, it's 10:30. LOL. Is that too late? I don't have to do wrestling tomorrow or anything. All I got to do is find a part-time job so I don't starve. But I was doing homework for like 6 hours today, and I had to do a stream. This is my only source of income right now. Plus, I just really wanted to do a stream for the sake of education and doing a stream. Past my bedtime, LOL. I'm sorry. It'll be up as a VOD. I mean, it'll be up as a YouTube video too, so you can watch it when you have more energy. Kim Jong-un killed me and I ended up appearing in a parade. That's crazy. So is that how necromancy works? Do you just like spam somewhere random? So like if Kim Jong-un executes you and then, they do Juche Necromancy, could you like show up at the bottom of the ocean and just blow up anyways? Or is it like controlled? Can they like send you wherever they want? I laughed my ass off. Hear about that landlord that tried to show up armed and evict a tenant and got shot and killed? I did not hear about that. I mean, I'm not recommending that people start doing that. I'm not saying everybody should just shoot their landlord. That's adventurism. There are people who have 1 or 2 properties who have worked their whole life and they realize there's no way to retire unless they start an Airbnb or something. So you can't just go around shooting landlords. And it's important to remember the landlords in China who were killed by Mao were literally feudal lords. They were hoarding huge swaths of land, miles and miles of land, and literally killing and torturing people and forcing them to work just absurd hours and enforcing really terrible cultural practices like the policy of foot binding, where women's feet would be bound up into a curve, deforming them and defiguring them because it was seen as more attractive or whatever. So these are horrible, oppressive feudal landlords that don't compare to the tiny small landlords in the U.S. But I'm not going to say that they don't compare to the giant banks and giant real estate companies in the U.S. because those are freaking ridiculous. And the fact that somebody would shoot their landlord who showed up and tried to evict them is a product of that. It's a product of the, real estate finance capitalist oligarchy that our country's become, where such a large percentage of everybody's paycheck goes to rent every month, where you have to pay so much of the measly wages that you're paid for your exploited labor. just to live in a house, just to house yourself, with utilities and rent. It's out of control. So you not only have these giant banks and real estate companies ripping people off, but you have these giant utility companies too. These companies like Alliant Energy or whatever else. Who I heard a story about from someone who worked for Alliant Energy about how they made him stay on call even when he was at his mom's funeral and tried to make him go into work, and reprimanded him and got him in trouble for not going into work. So these are the kind of companies exploiting us and charging you way more than what they should be for heating your house and having water. Landlord who showed up with a gun to try and evict them. Oh, that's what happened? That's messed up. I know people who are landlords and I get it, but it is like you're taking so much of everyone's paycheck. And there's so few who actually do work and actually maintain the house. It's so few. My landlord in college was like a slumlord. He never was over unless it was to yell at us for something like needing to have our washer replaced. Hey, Eddie, can you watch this 7-minute video of Cenk Uygur explaining why he isn't a socialist to Hassan? Sure. Sounds like a good video to watch. I had another one planned about communist TikToks, but we'll watch that later. I just got to pull up Twitch so I can pull up your video, Jacob.
Equality.
This should be interesting. Actually, before we play this, I do need to get a glass of water. I'm going to puke. Not gonna puke, but my mouth is dry. I'm a little under the weather, just like low, not super low on energy. I just feel a little bit like slow and off because I ate like crap this weekend, and probably drank too much and didn't get sleep and was on a bunch of planes. But nothing a little bit of water can't fix. All right, here's me wrestling the guy who's like ranked 3rd in the country in Greco.
Attempt by Smith, and that misses. White paddle back to their feet.
Use your legs. Over here. Pressure. Come on. Stay tight. Forward. Move your head position.
Center of the mat.
Pressure.
The hand fighting battle continues.
More pressure. I agree, Lucas. Thank goodness I finally have a real Greco coach. All right. Let's check out our old boy, Cenk Uygur. Is he a socialist? Is he not? Hassan Piker is about to find out.
Is not always exactly as intended. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because, like, there are differences between equality is not always exactly as intended. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because, like, there are differences between like what we can offer to every worker and how to do that. And the delivery mechanism for you is the state, and that's fine. And I understand that's a good concept. I somewhat agree with that. I'm not an anarchist, but my point is that there has never been a democratic process, and that in order to even achieve democracy, we need to have more political agency and more political autonomy. And the only way that we've like kind of arrived at that has been through like labor unions and the power of collective bargaining and all of that applied pressure that forced FDR and previous administrations to implement modest social reforms to correct the aberration, to correct all of the systemic inequalities. Well, not all of them, but some of them. But ultimately, we still operate under the assumption that this is totally fine and the best kind of organization that we can exist under. And that is why we still have, as you will also admit, politicians that are always going to represent the interests of corporations. It's not a new thing. It's not just because of Citizens United. The Citizens United decision is not the only reason why we have wealthy oligarchs paying politicians whatever they want to get whatever kind of legislation that they want. It predates 1978. It predates the New Deal.
Yeah, that's a pretty good argument from Hassan. I like when people make this argument, like Citizens United basically legalized political bribery, but that's just a higher expression, a higher legal expression of the capitalist dictatorship, of the dictatorship of the ruling capitalist class that's always existed. You know, the state has always been a tool of suppression that consists of armed bodies and special bodies like prisons, the military, the police force, who have a monopoly on violence. They're the only ones allowed to use violence, and they act as a tool of suppression by the ruling economic class against the exploited economic class. Right? This is not new, and Citizens United, legalizing political bribery is just, another development towards that. It's just the Supreme Court becoming an even bigger tool of the capitalist class and allowing the capitalist class to more thoroughly control Congress and more thoroughly control the executive office. But that doesn't mean that the Congress and executive office haven't always been controlled by corporations and the capitalist ruling class. They have since the history of capitalism. The Civil War was largely fought because of conflicting interests between, for one, the slaves and the slave owners, of course. Two, the white working class in the South, who had to sell their wages on the market in competition with slave labor, which drove their wages down and made their conditions destitute. But also a conflict between the northern capitalists in the North and the plantation owning slave owners in the South. Because there was two different economic systems, which created two different economic ruling classes, which controlled two different kinds of government. And so you had the formation of this government dominated by the slave oligarchs in the South, with various politicians who, from different stripes with different opinions on specific issues through the years, like Andrew Jackson and others. And then in the North, you had a government that was more controlled by the industrial capitalists. And eventually their interests came into conflict as they both kept trying to expand and expand and expand, because they were both economic systems based on market production and profit, which means that the capitalists and enslavers both had to constantly expand. They were like fighting each other over colonies and fighting each other over land and stuff, fighting each other over economic dominance. And, eventually it drew them into the Civil War. But the state has always been a tool of the economic ruling class, whether it was the slave owning ruling class or the capitalist ruling class. That didn't just begin in 2011 or 2013, whenever Citizens United was.
This has always been the case. And my point is that it's been the case because the system is designed to manufacture these results.
Yeah, no, I don't agree.
It was 2010. That was Citizens United. But Jenks is like, no, I don't agree. The part that I just said was Hassan's best point. He's like, no. Okay, Jenk, let's see. Let's see what he has to say. Can't jump to conclusions.
So
explain to me this then. If it's not about if it's corporatism and not capitalism, then why did we have such a hard time coming to terms with the abolition of slavery? If it wasn't purely at the behest of capital that our political figures, why did they design this country, right? A country that you have called the best country on earth at many different points. Why did they design this country to have a non-direct, non-representative democracy that only worked for white male landowners and owners of slaves?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different answers to that. First off, there's always...
So he also used the slavery argument, but made a slightly different argument than me, right? He said the economic ruling class has always controlled the state. So basically the same argument as me, right? He didn't make the distinction between, a government that served the capitalists in the North, that was the Union, and one that served the slave owners in the South, that was the Confederacy, split into two different kinds of states, two different forms of the state, representative of the two different forms of the ruling economic class between the Confederacy and the Union. But, you know, he says basically the ruling economic class has always controlled the state. Look at, you know, the government during the time of Southern slavery. They were given the thumbs up to slavery over and over and over and over again, even though clearly, if you read the literature, if you read what people were arguing at the time, they knew it was wrong for years. They knew slavery was immoral for years and years and years and years. And there were so many people who argued against it. But it was only when, you know, class struggle came to a breaking point that it ended. But the state's always been a dictatorship of the ruling economic class.
I agree with you on that. There's always some competing interests, let's put it that way, between the capital owners and the non-capital owners. Slavery is a very stark example of that. And so but you should know there was actually very large.
There's also competition between the capital owners and the slave owners, and the capital owners and the capital owners. But ultimately, the interests of the capitalist class are in expanding and maximizing their profits and controlling markets and maximizing the exploitation of the toiling masses, which they can do by controlling the government, the state.
Corporations around back then. The founding fathers actually despised those corporations.
Jenk talks really fast, so we're going to slow it down to 1.25.
Was partly out of a revolution, not just against the British monarchy, but against those companies like the East Indian Company that they did that. The Boston Tea Party was not against the government, was not against the monarchy. It was against the British Tea Company that they did that. So, and they warned us about the takeover of corporations. Now, nonetheless, they were very affected by the capital situation in terms of slavery, et cetera. And, but also you have to give it in its proper historical context. So like, for example, people say, well, you know, Islam actually greatly improved the rights of women back then in that geographic area. And that is true. They had no rights and Islam gave them some rights. I would counter that God should know that they should have full rights, right? Yeah. And so he should have amended the Quran by now or actually done it right. But when you talk about a democracy, we're not talking about a supernatural creature. We're talking about a normal evolution. The reason why I respect the founding fathers so much is that not only did they significantly increase the amount of participation in our government, by taking it from just the lords and the royalty, et cetera, to propertied white males, that now seems anachronistic because it's anachronistic because we don't live in that time. But back then,
I mean, yeah, things aren't static, right? Things like religion and things like Islam could be used by the ruling class, and they can be used by the working class. You know, they can be used as a progressive force in history or not. What Jenk is really describing is how does religion and, you know, how do politics affect the class struggle? And he's saying that, you know, different ideas can affect the class struggle progressively or in a reactionary way at different points in history. But yeah, I didn't know where he was going with that argument for a second, but.
Then that was a massive, massive world-changing earthquake. And the second earthquake is understated and everybody gets it wrong. When they said you should amend this constitution, what that did was it allowed for nonstop revolutions. Every amendment is a revolution so that you don't have to go to violence, you don't have to pick up muskets, et cetera. And so they anticipated, and they were right, that we would expand the circle of liberty. And guess what? We did. It did work. Because if capital was always the oppressor, well, then there would be no way out. Then we would have never ended slavery, and we would have never had the civil rights movement. We would have never had the suffragettes.
So again, I mean, I've already explained all of this on this stream in this segment, but the way out of slavery was through class struggle, right? It was through the struggle of all these competing classes and the slave-owning oligarchy, the plantation oligarchy. But one of the classes that came into conflict with the plantation oligarchy was the northern industrial capitalists. So I don't know how this proves that there's no way out, like he says, away from capital, because that was capital coming to, or capitalism asserting its dominance, spreading its dominance in the U.S. And replacing the outdated, more reactionary slave mode of production. But that doesn't prove that the government, no, he's saying that this shows that there is a way out because that happened. But, you know, the capitalist class was still in control of the union, right, for the most part. But the capitalist class had economic interests that were no longer in line with the slave owners who they had previously just, you know, used that giant cotton market. But as they came into competition more and more, they fought. So this doesn't prove at all that capital at one point wasn't in control of the U.S. government, right? It was just two different kinds of capital. It was slave capital and a slave political systems, laws and rules and regulations that went along with the slave mode of production, which came into conflict constantly in the places where what would become the Confederacy bordered the Union, because they had two economic systems. So there was all sorts of conflict and what kind of laws and rules were to be accepted. So eventually this class conflict led to a struggle. But at no point was one of the governments, just dominated by the workers and slaves. That's why Reconstruction failed. It was ultimately dominated by the ruling capitalist class, and the prison industrial complex basically came to not replace slavery, but, a newer and more modern form of it. And we just had wage labor replace slave labor, which there were a lot of people at the time saying that we need, now that we've gotten rid of slave labor, we need to attack wage labor. And Abraham Lincoln saying that labor is much the superior of capital and should be given higher consideration, which, maybe that shows that at one point the U.S. government wasn't totally dominated by capital, or the Union wasn't, and the workers had more control because of their position in the class struggle or whatever else. But then Abraham Lincoln was killed. He was assassinated. So, capital once again came to control the government, because capital's always controlled the government. Cenk Uygur. And as Cobra Commander says, he's just talking in circles.
We would have never had any of those things. And we did have all those things. Now, it is extraordinarily difficult, and we wish it wasn't. That's why we're trying to fix the system. And right now, it has become more difficult than it has ever been, in a sense, in American history.
But we're not in disagreement on this. My point is that it is ahistorical to look at this. I mean, you already admitted it. It's ahistorical to look at this and say, like, oh, well, ultimately we will expand rights, and then that's how we're supposed to do it, and assume that, like, that's precisely how things would go. Obviously, every single instance of social progress and even economic progress, albeit that was less frequent, has been done through a lot of public pressure. And of course that it still happened. And I get that, and that's great. But it almost feels like you and I are in agreement that there is a next stage in this evolution. And my point has always been that next stage in our evolution comes from increasing the democracy.
This is an interesting way to put it. I don't know if this is Carlos or Noah in the chat. I assume Carlos, but to say that America essentially had a dictatorship of the proletariat, which first, the Civil War absolutely was the second American Revolution. We had the revolution that got rid of the colonial domination of the British, right? An anti-colonial revolution. Even though it's not super similar to like anti-colonial revolutions that maybe we often think of, it was an anti-colonial revolution. It was progressive. It did move the mode of production forward. It advanced the mode of production. And then the Civil War, of course, got rid of slavery as the mode of production, advanced it forward to capitalism. It was a progressive, non-reactionary revolution, was what the Civil War was. And like I said, it was a product of class struggle. And Carlos here is giving us some details and some facts to go deeper into that, about how the black proletariat, or the slaves, essentially led a general strike, withholding their labor and shutting down a lot of the power, a lot of the economic power of the Southern plantation owners who they hated. So a perfect example of how this was a product of class struggle, a battle for the government, or a battle more specific, or more so, for the economy between the different classes involved, of which there were many. There were the slaves who led the general strike. There were a lot of, as we said, white workers who hated the plantation oligarchy who joined the Union. There were a lot of white workers in the Confederate States who were tricked into fighting for the Confederacy and against their own interests too. But it's interesting to say that at one point the U.S. essentially had a dictatorship of the proletariat that took hold. Basically stating that in this tumultuous time with all these different classes, it was the toiling masses, the proletarians, who had the most control of the government at a point. Before, like I said, not just the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but the failure of Reconstruction, and the maintained, sustained dominance of the ruling capitalist class, and the maintenance of wage labor and the worsening of wage labor and how exploitative it was with time. So interesting there to say that I've never heard the post Civil War government described as a dictatorship of the proletariat, but I like it. Thank you, Carlos.
Democracy that we experience.
But how wrong is Cenk Uygur? Like Carlos and I are having this discussion, and the people in the chat are having this discussion about, like, what were the exact class forces during the Civil War? When, was the U.S. a dictatorship of the proletariat? When did it transition out of that? Which class took power following the Civil War and the class struggle that led to it? And then Cenk Uygur is just like, nope, this proves that the government hasn't always been dominated by capital, or hasn't always been dominated by the dominant economic ruling class. That started with Citizens United. It is so simple. We're going to DOTP before the Paris Commune. I'll be discussing this in the panel. Midwestern Marx is sponsoring with IMG. Awesome. It's all Du Bois, by the way. Black Reconstruction. Very cool. Yes, everyone read Du Bois. So we're talking about this moment in American history, the failure of Reconstruction, which, as we're discussing it as a product of class struggle. And even my grasp on this point in history, even though I've written that article about, slavery's role in the development of global capitalism, my grasp on American history and these important issues is not as good as I want it to be. I've taken classes in college about Reconstruction, one that got interrupted for COVID, but everybody needs to be reading Du Bois is my ultimate point. Everybody needs to be reading Du Bois and these American socialist thinkers who studied and understood our own conditions, the conditions and the developments of our country, which people just want to throw out all the time, or any analysis, of history or reclaiming of revolutionary figures in American history who led the class struggle or waged the class struggle. Any support for them or any discussion of them is called, oh, you're just being a pat sock. You're being a fascist for talking about America as if it's a country. It's only settlers here. We need to recapture our history, our revolutionary heroes, and we need to understand our own history. We need to understand the failure of Reconstruction. We need to understand the Civil War as a economic revolution, as the kind of revolutionary struggle that Marx was talking about, that, after years and years of struggle between different classes, culminates in a battle, in a fight, which decides which economic class and which mode of production will be dominant, and allows the capitalist mode of production to spread and, take the whole of the U.S. So it's vital for us to understand the Civil War in that way and to have a Marxist analysis of our own country. Like, I'm guilty of this too. Right now, really, I'm criticizing myself right now because we love looking at other countries. I love looking at Venezuela. I love looking at Cuba, and that's very important, especially when you're in the imperial core. You need to understand, the struggle needs to be international. You should understand the struggle of others and the role of U.S. imperialism in trying to stop the struggle for socialism abroad. But it's more important to know our own history so we can use that to change our own conditions. So we can use that to take down the empire. So we can use that to get a dictatorship of the proletariat in the U.S. so they stop destroying and sanctioning and, waging warfare against countries trying to build socialism elsewhere. Which is why it's so important to study thinkers like Henry Winston, study thinkers like W.E.B. Du Bois. And, this is not something I've talked about a lot, but in our interview with Anthony Montero, I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, but he really, really, really got me thinking about this stuff and really, really got me to see the importance of it all. This is someone who knew Henry Winston. This is someone who worked with people who worked directly with W.E.B. Du Bois. This is someone who worked with and knew who should be the revolutionary heroes of the American struggle. I don't know that a lot of socialists are in touch, with our history and upholding the people that we should be upholding, that Dr. Montero upholds in this video and tells us to study in this video. But, that's so vital. If we don't recapture our history, if we don't look at MLK and Du Bois and these other figures as products of class struggle and as revolutionaries who changed America for the better, if we don't have a Marxist analysis of these things, then we're not going to wage a successful struggle today. We're just not, because everything that we see today has historical roots, right? Everything has its origin somewhere. Everything is a product of historical development. So if we don't understand the historical development of our country, we are not going to be able to change our country. So if we, tell ourselves lies like the U.S., to tie this back to Cenk Uygur somehow, if we tell ourselves lies like the U.S. capitalist class only took power of the government with citizens united, that's not accurate. We're not going to have a realistic understanding of how we got to where we are today. And you're just going to take positions like, well, as long as we vote for Democrats who, claim to be against citizens united, then that means we're moving in the right direction. We're moving in a progressive direction. No, that means nothing, because citizens united is not the source of the dictatorship of capital. Got to work in the morning, so I'll be heading out. Thanks for featuring my article, Eddie. Thanks for all the work you do. Thank you, Jimmy. Super glad to feature your article. It was awesome. So appreciate that. Always pumped to read your work when it's published.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, Jesus Christ Superstar. Who in the world do you think you are? Isn't that how that song goes? I have a sad story about that song. Thank you so much for the super sticker. Thank you so much for the support. Much love. But one of my family members, when they were a kid, I guess that song like traumatized them, because her family was so religious and raised her so religious that she didn't know there was people out there who didn't believe in Jesus. So when they heard a song mocking Jesus, they were just like mind blown, like traumatized. It's a play, right? That's my historical origins. Actually, I'm going to get copyrighted if I play Jesus Christ Superstar, so I'm not going to do that song. Other than that, Cenk is okay. He just has Cold War progressive tendencies. I don't know if I agree with that. Thank you again, Jesus Christ Superstar, for the $4.99 super sticker. I really want to say how much I appreciate that. But I probably have a difference of opinion on this. Cenk is pretty bad. I don't know if I agree with much of what he says. And didn't TYT take a huge corporate? I know they did. They've been taking like tons of super sketchy donations and sponsorships. Like Jeffrey Katzenberg's Winder co-invest in TYT network as a part of $20 million round. So like, I know Midwestern Marks has a Patreon, right? Patreon.com/Midwestern Marks. And we have advertisements on our website, right? But taking $20 million from a corporation, come on. And it's so funny, like when the Gray Zone or when investigative journalists will publish a story like this. Sorry, this isn't to come at UP, Logan. I appreciate you for your comment. But when the Gray Zone publishes a story like this saying, this person took money from these people. This person got $20 million from this organization. Therefore, they're probably affiliated. When they follow the money like that, there are people who mock them. Neoliberals, of course, who mock them and say, you're a conspiracy theorist. You just think because someone gets $20 million from a Washington, D.C. think tank that's run by weapons manufacturers, that they're beholden to those weapons manufacturers. But if how crazy it would be for Midwestern Marks to get $20 million, or for a media outlet to get $20 million, like you really start to understand it. I feel like when, you're in the media sphere, and part of your income and survival is tied to money and producing video content that gets views or whatever, right? If you're offered a $20 million sponsorship from someone, that is going to influence your views, right? If you accept it. And there's always that temptation for people like Cenk Uygur to sell out, right? So I think there's people who are naive about this. And I say this because I used to be super naive about this and think, most people wouldn't sell out. People stay true to their principles, right? No, people are tied to their income source. And even, folks like Kyle Kulinski, I feel like part of the reason that Kulinski, and I don't think he's taken millions of dollars from Jeffrey Katzenberg or NGOs, but, one of the things about him is he hasn't changed his opinions in years, right? He's been saying the same talking points basically for like 10, 12 years with a little bit of variation depending on what's going on, depending on the material conditions. But, I feel like he has his audience, he has his niche, and he's like afraid if I move further left or move towards Marxism or, move towards a truly revolutionary position, anything other than social democracy, then I'm going to lose my audience. Like he has a very specific audience of a very specific economic class, like a middle class audience who likes his content and agrees with his content. I'm sure he's got a lot of working class people in his audience too, but he doesn't want to lose that. His income is tied to that. So, and that affects everyone. New member. Thank you so much, Sam Dixon, for becoming a member. Please enjoy the emotes and the emojis or all the different things that you get for being a member. Appreciate you for doing that. For those who don't know, YouTube has this new member service. It's basically like Twitch subscriptions, but for YouTube. So if you become a Midwestern Marks member, you get a few perks. One, your comments get priority, like they show up like this. Now there's that little mark next to Sam Dixon's name because he became a member. You get the emojis and emotes. You get, if you're a $10 member, you get a copy of the Midwestern Marks print journal, the Journal of American Socialist Studies, big time prize. Hey, all, hope everyone is well. Currently working on a book, The Human Cost of Food, the Conditions of the Migrant Working Class of the Salinas Valley, and love the Institute's work. Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. Sounds like a really interesting book. I'd be super interested in reading it. Yeah, where's Salinas Valley? That sounds like an analysis of the American material conditions and the American class struggle. It's in California. Yeah, there you go. Talking about the migrant laborers. Wow, that's going to be a really valuable book, Sam. So thanks for becoming a member and thanks for doing that intellectual labor. And I wish you all the best. Let us know if you want us to promote your book when you publish it. The salad bowl of the world, huh? Interesting. California, the Wisconsin, my home state, used to produce like the most cranberries, I believe. And then Cali passed us. And I think Cali even produces more cheese than Wisconsin, which is wild. But yeah, interesting that they're also the salad bowl of the world. Lots of stuff produced in Cali. Have to give props to Kyle. He's what got me into lukewarm leftist politics before I became a socialist. Hey, me too, kind of. Me too. He's the one who got me to support Bernie. Because at first, my instincts were like, I don't really trust Bernie. I just think he's better than the other ones. And I took like one of those, who should I vote for tests online. And it gave me Bernie. And I was like, maybe I'm a socialist. But then I found Kyle Kulinski. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not a socialist. I'm just one of these social democrats. And then the Bernie Sanders campaign failed miserably and AOC sold out. And I'm like, no. I'm a socialist. Bernie can suck it. It's essentially Engels' condition of the working class, but applied to new context. And thank you kindly. Awesome. That's just what I was hoping. So yeah, that would be perfect. I mean, Engels' conditions of the working class in England. Really, and this is part of the reason Engels is so underrated compared to Marx. Partially, that happened because he was so humble and he always put Marx above himself, which, Marx was a more important thinker, of course, but Marx's work wouldn't have come about as quickly as it did, or maybe would have even been impossible without Engels' conditions of the working class in England. Because that gave this historically materialist analysis of the development of the working class that allowed there that served as the basis for so much of Marx's work, and for Marx to, look at and start to piece together his theory of dialectical and historical materialism. Hey, yo, Eddie plus chat. Hey, yo, Unparalleled Dev. How are you? How's it going? Good to see ya. So now, actually, I'll do that next time. So now,
so today I wanted to take a look at
there was a fairly popular video that I've seen people react to, other socialist creators react to, I believe, called "Reacting to Gen Z, Communists, and Socialists on TikTok." And I thought I have to react to this. I'm probably in this, right? This is probably me. This is probably some person going viral on YouTube reacting to my content. Okay, so I'm very interested to see this video, mostly for selfish reasons, for vain reasons. I want to see if I'm in it. Probably not. She's probably just taking, liberals out of context and saying this is what socialism is. But we'll see. We'll react to it. I haven't seen this video before. I'm a little nervous to be, blind reacting to it on stream, but it's going to be awesome. Let's do it. So before we get into that, thank you so much to Akea Watchel for the $20 super chat. Huge. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I wouldn't have this camera or microphone or laptop without you. Your support is necessary for our project. Thank you. I live in a tourist place in California, and I feel like there aren't enough videos out there on how continental tourism is affected. I'm not saying Hawaii and intercontinental tourism aren't awful, but within the mainland states, Interesting. I wonder if there would be people in like Colorado who have similar feelings. Puerto Rico, I mean, I guess this would that would be intercontinental tourism, Puerto Rico, but it's really affected Puerto Rico. Like it's one of those places like similar to a lot of places in Mexico, where San Juan, the tourist spot, and Old San Juan are pretty rich, pretty wealthy, tons of activity, economic activity and commerce. But then you go outside of San Juan and Old San Juan, and it's, impoverished and run down. And there's not a lot of shelter, and there's a lot of, dying and diseased dogs all over the street, and signs of poverty, homelessness, everything that is associated with poverty and capitalism. Meanwhile, like I said, they're just tourists coming in and out of Old San Juan all the time, and that place is economically stable. And Cuba, has utilized tourism as a part of their socialist economy. But yeah, it would be interesting to see more about how it's affected places like California and tourism within the continent, within the state. My only experience with that is Puerto Rico, so that's what I went to first. But if I research that more, I'll definitely do a video on it. But thank you for the $20 super chat. So now, without further ado, I'll get into reacting to Gen Z, communists, and socialists on TikTok.
So today I wanted to take a look at some of the craziness going on. There are a lot of communists and socialists on TikTok. I want to take a look at those. And also I want to review some communism slogans.
Hey, that's me.
Which I think are very important to realize just how flawed the ideology is. And yeah.
It's about Southern socialism. So this is to raise awareness that, there are leftist movements.
The fact that we're having
based. That one was super based. What did she have? State and Revolution, some old school Angela Davis. I need to be friends with that person.
so many people in Gen Z identifying as socialist and communist shows just how much we failed teaching students the dangers of communism and socialism, and just how many people were starved to death and the mass murder of millions of people. I mean, take a look at the.
It's so funny how it's just like the opposite, She's like, we've really failed in teaching our kids how evil communism and socialism is and how much it's failed. when in reality, we've been really, really successful in indoctrinating our kids with that idea, which is why it's even possible for people to say stuff like this, or why people can still source the Black Book of Communism, which says, communism has killed a million bajillion people, even though the book's own authors said it was unscholarly and untrue and shouldn't be taken serious.
Soviet Union, for example, when they were a socialist society, 18 million people were incarcerated in the Gulag. Why? Well, the person could have been.
There are far more people incarcerated today in the United States than there ever were in the Soviet gulags, which were ended after Stalin, by the way. But far more people. And we have this system of prison labor that allows these giant corporations that make up the prison industrial complex to profit off labor, where the workers are paid far less than minimum wage, often under $1 an hour. Some states allow like 37 cents an hour. Am I back? My Wi-Fi went out for a second, but hopefully it's back. But there are all these companies that are profiting off of the super cheap prison labor in the U.S., where we have more people incarcerated per capita than any other country by far. We have something like 24% of the world's prison population, with only 4% of the world's total population in our country. And, they make you pay for phone calls. They make you pay for cash bail. They have all these different ways of profiting off these prisoners, which means they're incentivized to keep the prisons full. And our current president and vice president, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, have been, or Kamala Harris, sorry, I always say her name wrong. But either way, they've been instrumental in building this system, building this prison industrial complex, this system that profits off of prison labor. So that's capitalism. That's not socialism. The gulags at the time, were intended to be rehabilitative because, or they were intended to be rehabilitation through labor, and there were other countries that had labor camps all around the world, and obviously it went out of style in the Soviet Union and everyone got rid of them. But, the only country today that still has labor camps is the U.S. Uh-oh, this ain't good. Might have to hit the old restart. What are we at here? 54.
A criminal, or they could have spoken out against the government. And that's great for the government because then they get free labor from these prisoners. We can take a look at the polls and we'll see that over half of Gen Z hate capitalism, distrust the government, and support socialism, which is very funny.
Probably because literally everything you just said about socialism is happening in capitalist America to a worse degree, which is so funny.
Because how can you simultaneously distrust the government but advocate for socialism? I mean, the whole idea in socialism is that the government is going to regulate everything. They're going to distribute the wealth. They're going to take care of healthcare. How does that work?
How can you simultaneously say you trust or you don't trust the government, you want socialism? Because not all governments are the same. Because government doesn't just mean one static thing that can never, ever, ever change its form. There are different kinds of government. Our current government is a dictatorship of capital. The capitalist class controls it via lobbyists and campaign donations and control of the media and academic institutions and NGOs and think tanks and blah, 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 blah. And they control other governments via the military and imperialism and economic warfare. It's the capitalist ruling economic class who exploits the laboring masses to make more and more surplus, which they use to control the government. We want to take the government from them and turn it into a tool for the workers. We want to qualitatively change the form of government into something new, into something that serves us, right? So the reason you can't even wrap your head around this is because you guys just have a static version of the government. A static idea of government is just something that's always bad, evil, and inefficient, even though that doesn't make any sense because there have been tons of different forms of government historically. Even in the U.S. at one point, we had the split into the Confederacy and the Union, two different forms of government, which represented two different ruling classes or different economic systems, two different modes of production, slavery and capitalism. Governments can take different forms, and it's usually, it's primarily based on the different forms or the different modes of production. underlying them.
Before we get into this, guys, please make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell so that you don't miss my videos. So let's start with a very famous video. This is a kid who is talking about why we need communism.
When it was founded, we still need communism.
This kid is so based. I love this kid.
Communism.
If I were to ever start a country with a communist government, wink, wink, wait 12 years. Poor people, we really can't have poor people. It's not.
This kid's a capitalist now. He revoked his communist views as an adult. He fell to the pressure of the bourgeoisie. You know, I thought he was the young Lenin, but really he was a young Trotsky.
Good for like a whole class of people to be poor. People need money. And secondly, some people might say, oh, we have welfare. Welfare just promotes lazy people.
I actually agree with him there.
And I don't know, but I'm pretty sure welfare, especially down in the United States, costs a bit of moolah. So yeah, all those morons saying that communism is the same as welfare, you can go leave because you are just an absolute moron. Just look up the definition of that. I'm sorry I got a little heated, but when people say it's the same as welfare, I get really angry. Anyway, yeah, that's why we still need communism.
I can't say that he convinced
It's like watching Trotsky, you know, before he betrayed the revolution.
me, but we'll keep looking. And a lot of these Gen Z people are into communism because they hate capitalism. Capitalism is so very evil, and it's the root cause of every issue that you experience. And I thought we would take a look at some of these TikToks explaining why that is. That's so funny that you're saying you're going to be a slave to capitalism, but you wouldn't be a slave in a communist society or a socialist society because communism can't actually be achieved. But let's talk about that. Take a look at your job, for example. In a capitalist society, you have the choice to pick a career. And if you were in a socialist society, you wouldn't have that choice. If you were back in the Soviet Union, right, they would tell you what job you're doing. There's no discussion. You go to school for free, they pay for that, but then you have to repay them, not with money, but by listening to them and obeying and doing what they ask you to. So for example, if there's a shortage of doctors in Siberia, guess where you're going? You're going to be a doctor in Siberia. And until that debt is paid off, maybe that's 5 years, maybe that's 7 years.
Well, guess what? In the US, if healthcare conglomerates and giant pharmaceutical companies aren't making profit off of selling healthcare to your small town, they're going to leave, which is why we've had over 100 rural hospitals shut down in the last few years alone, because it's become unprofitable to serve those small areas. Whereas Cuba has expanded healthcare access by offering free medical school to their people, even to the rural regions. And it's not just done by forcible relocation. They have a system set up where you get free medical school if you promise to go serve 2 years or so in the Escambray, in the rural regions of Cuba where they need healthcare. So these efforts are efforts to take care of their people. And it's the capitalist countries, you know, where you have no choice but to sell your labor, which is then going to be exploited. You know, you're not going to make the full value of your labor. Your labor is not going to be reinvested in things like healthcare for the people. It's not going to be spent on you. Your labor is going to go to create material and monetary wealth for your boss, for somebody else. So again, projection, everything they say about communism is actually capitalism. But then, you know, the hilarious claim is, oh, they're sending doctors to work in Siberia. Like, oh, heaven forbid we have doctors in rural areas. I know that's foreign to the US, where 40,000 people die every year because they don't have health insurance, or where the pharmaceutical companies are more concerned with getting people addicted to opioids so they can make a profit than they are treating people's actual healthcare needs. But
you're not coming back home. Forget about stuff.
I'm getting a master's in healthcare administration, by the way. So read the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2 on MidwesternMarks.com if you want an analysis, dialectical materialist analysis of the American healthcare system.
Your own business, there's no free enterprise, right? In the Soviet Union, for example, if you even attempted to do that, you would be sent to a labor camp. Let's continue.
Like many.
That's not true. One of the guys who made one of the main Soviet tanks that defeated the German army, that defeated the Nazis, was this guy who owned a candy shop. right? But because they didn't have these super exploitative long hours for workers, this guy who ran the candy shop and worked at the candy shop had time to design this tank because he was interested in engineering. And then he brought the tank to Stalin. Stalin had him test it out, and it became, they mass produced it, and it became one of the greatest, or it became really useful in helping them defeat the German Nazi army. It just shows how socialism incentivizes innovation. But what do you mean you're not allowed to, start a business or create something or innovate something under socialism? There was literally a guy running a candy shop, a business, who invented something.
Young adults, I used to think
made him famous.
that my goal in life was to be happy and healthy. It is until I discovered capitalism. Now, my only goal is to constantly prove my worth to other people. With capitalism, my self-worth is directly tied to my productivity. And so I have transcended from just a human being to a human doing.
Just a human being. Is your worth not in your productivity? Where is your worth coming from then? Sitting at home, sipping your iced latte that you were able to buy because of a job, presumably, or money from your parents, probably more likely in this case. But what do you mean? Where's your worth going to come from then? Seriously, where are you going to get fulfillment if not a job? Are you just do you want to just sit at home all day? What are you talking about?
I mean, family, friends, spending time with other people, playing music. You could do things that aren't, productive technically, that aren't producing value in the strict sense, that make you happy and give you a sense of self-worth. And I feel bad for you that you don't know that. But at the same time, it's as I talked about in my recent article about neoclassical economics, it's the neoclassical capitalist economists who say that value is subjective and value is dependent on the consumer, and value is dependent on how much people want to buy an iced chai latte or whatever. And it's socialists who say that value stems from labor. Value stems from something material, something concrete, from human productivity, from humans' action, our activity, the way that we interact with nature, the way that we mediate nature and use it to create the things we need to survive. So the labor theory of value, is a socialist, is a Marxist thing. So if you think that value and comes from labor and productivity, you should be a Marxist, not a capitalist. The capitalists believe in this weird subjective utility theory of value that doesn't make any damn sense.
Amazing. Capitalism is not just an economic and political system anymore. It's also a lifestyle. Get on with it. Hashtag internalize capitalism. Capitalism is so hot that I just can't fight this feeling that no matter what I do, it's just never gonna be enough.
No, that is your mental health problems. That's not capitalism's fault, honey.
Start subscribing to capitalism.
That's not capitalism, honey. That's your mental health problems that you have while existing in a capitalist system. They're definitely all your fault, though. It's the fault of the individual. Don't blame exploitation for your mental health problems, honey.
And today, you can also get consumerism, hustle culture, hyper-individualistic culture, and if you're lucky, feeling dead inside.
Again, that is your own personal issue that you're dealing with.
And don't forget, worker exploitation.
It's not. What do you mean it's your own personal issue? Do you know how many mass shootings and how steeply depression and suicide is on the rise in this country? But no, we can't say that that's a product of our economic system. We can't say that's a product of how we do things and how we run our country. It's just every individual's fault. It's your fault. If you have depression, you can't blame any external factors or look at the reality. Or look at the way that capitalism makes people sick, as Howard Waitskin talks about in his excellent book called The Second Sickness, which talks about the crisis of capitalist healthcare, which has to treat people in a system that's overworking people and making people sick and feeding people, consumeristic, terrible food filled with preservatives and sugar and processed chemicals and stuff. So the system itself is making people sick, and then doctors have to treat those people. So oftentimes they just end up giving them stimulants and opioids and things that mask the symptoms. But no, it's all from the individual. It's just from people being weak-minded. Just tough it out. Quit blaming capitalism for everything and clean your damn room.
Worker exploitation. You're not going to experience that in socialism? Y'all are funny.
Is not free 99, but you know what is? The illusion of choice.
I feel like I'm listening to like a bot, or like some corporate marketing team trying to speak to Gen Z. Y'all be funny. Y'all are funny with this socialism stuff.
So what are you waiting for? Never rest without feeling guilty ever again and start subscribing to Capitalism today.
There's also this very strange TikTok. Take a look. Honestly, if that did happen, that person he was going to hook up with did dodge a bullet for sure. So yeah, capitalism is the root cause of all your problems. That's interesting. I mean, just take a look at the people that lived through communism, for example. I mean, did that really work out well for them? You have to be a hardworking and creative individual to get money, right? And these people are so upset about the fact that they have to work hard to earn money that they're blaming capitalism for all the problems in the world. Can you imagine blaming every issue ever on capitalism? The same system that lets you choose a job, work hard, and get money instead of being paid the same amount as someone else doing some work that's way, way less strenuous than yours. If you work hard, you could.
I don't even know what she's saying. I don't even know what point this is. It's just like platitudes. There's no even like logic here. I mean, does this even constitute an argument? You know, if you work hard, you'll get rich. Capitalism, when you work, you get money. Capitalism good. Capitalism good. Work, get money. Get wage. Wage good. Money good. Capitalism good. Work harder. Get more money. Get more wage. Capitalism good. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Exploitation is a mathematical thing. Okay, the lower your wages go, the more surplus your boss is going to make. Right? He's got to pay for your wages. You know, for him, it's variable capital. It's part of his capital. Your labor is seen as a part of his capital, which is then sold for a surplus, sold for a profit. Right? That's what exploitation is. So under capitalism, under a system of wage labor, you'll never get the full value of your labor, because the person who owns the means of production, the tools and the machines that you need to produce, that you labor with, are incentivized to pay you as little as possible so they can make as much as possible. But then, you know, the fact that you can quit anytime, or that it's technically, you know, the transaction between wage labor and capitalists technically happens in the sphere of circulation and appears as a transaction between buyer and seller, when actually, you know, the working masses, because they don't own the means of production, are forced into selling their labor, are forced into that relation. They pretend that it's voluntary. When could everyone just, you know, up and quit their jobs and leave right now and go work wherever they wanted? No. You know, people's health insurance is tied to their job, right? People need consistent income. It would take weeks to find another job if you quit. And of course, it's not voluntary when one class of people owns all the food, shelter, water, and things that you need to survive. And the only way to get a little tiny fraction of those things that your labor produces is to sell more and more of your labor.
You can get that luxury life that you want. And then if you're a good person, you can donate some of your money to hospitals, to...
I don't even want a luxury life, though, right? Like, this goes to show that she has internalized the capitalist pull yourself up by your bootstraps mindset that she was talking about earlier. She's saying that productivity is the only thing that can make you happy. Working harder is the only thing that can make you happy. You know, just work hard and live a luxurious life and live in a mansion, and then, you know, become one of the exploiters instead of one of the exploited, and then you'll be happy. Oh, is that what will make me happy? A lot of wealth, a lot of luxury goods? You know, what about community with other people? What about more free time? You know, what about not being trapped at my job for hours, you know, away from my family? These are the things that are important to me, not just making a bunch of money and hoarding a bunch of luxury goods. What are you, Ebenezer Scrooge?
To schools. A lot of rich people do that, but no, instead you want to cry and complain about how it's really hard and capitalism is evil. I mean, you're taking your freedom to choose an occupation for granted, right? Because in a socialist society, you wouldn't have that freedom. There would be a body of government who would tell you and assign you a job. Guess what? You can't change your job without consent from that authority, which led to a lot of corruption, like bribery. And what a lot of these young socialists like to do is they like to bring up the example of Sweden or other Nordic countries that are quote unquote socialist, but they have a lot of capitalism in their country and they don't talk about.
Oh, yes, very good point. even if Sweden and Norway and those countries were socialist, like China, socialism's a system that has to transition out of capitalism. That's the whole idea of scientific socialism and Marxism. So there would be a lot of capitalism in an early stage socialist society, in the early construction of socialism, because one system, one mode of production needs to emerge out of another. Every mode of production creates the seeds for its own destruction, and through class struggle eventually turns into a different mode of production, just like with what happened with feudalism in Europe or with slavery in the US. These modes of production eventually came to an end because of class struggle and revolutionary struggles, and were replaced by capitalism. And eventually the same thing will happen to capitalism, but the early socialist societies will have a lot of capitalism. Doesn't mean capitalism's a superior system. The best parts of the Scandinavian social democracies are their welfare programs, are their nationalized industry. Norway, by example, has a nationalized oil industry, and that's been hugely successful in paying for social programs that have made people's lives better. But, according to people like this, if you want social programs and healthcare, you're just a whiner. You just need to stop complaining. Just stop complaining and live without healthcare. Just work harder. People who can't afford insulin in the US should just work harder. All the people who die every year because they don't have insulin didn't work hard enough for it. I know, but the pharmaceutical shareholders who collect billions of dollars in shareholder dividends for lying us into the opioid crisis, or just from sitting on their butts, those people did work hard enough. Okay. I didn't know hard work meant ripping people off on their insulin, on their drugs that they need to take so they don't die. Now I know. Was this stream about wacky North Korea claims? It was, for sure. Now we've moved on a little bit, but would love to hear your take on homeless people. Just work, you lazy bones. Yeah, I don't get why homeless people just don't work. Why don't they just go to a job interview? Why don't people with crippling mental health issues, no health care, no access to a shower or change of clothes, who've been sleeping on the streets day after day, just go get a job with no access to a phone or no access to a computer? I lost my phone when I graduated college and COVID hit. Jeez, that was, my roommates just jumped, created an earthquake. I lost my phone. It was so hard to get a job because how do you have an employer contact you? How do you have them call you to set up an interview if you don't have a cell phone? And it was just the realization, how is a homeless person realistically supposed to get a job without social programs in place to hook them up with jobs? Which is why we should have a jobs guarantee, which is why we should have socialism. Don't you need a house to have a chance to get a job? Yes. And that's why, it's economic, even from a productive standpoint. Even if all you, like this girl, all you value is production. All you value is, human activity and human labor that produces more things, or produces things that you're paid money for. Then putting homeless people in houses is going to increase production. It's going to increase productive activity. It's going to allow more people to have stability in their lives. That's going to allow them to get jobs, as would a jobs guarantee. But because it's not run by the capitalist class who has brainwashed these people, because a jobs guarantee would have to be public, have to be done by the government, they're against it. We love productivity and jobs as long as people are being exploited by mega corporations. No government jobs allowed. No socialist jobs allowed. No nationalization of industry allowed. It reminds me of the PragerU video where they said that, where they responded to me and said that me advocating for the nationalization of industry means I want every industry to be the DMV.
Whereas in the US, only a fraction of the amount of
response. Then I'll play some goofy, funny joke one that I made when I found out that PragerU posted me. And then we'll talk about nationalized industry and the DMV and everything more in depth. All right.
If you can't live without something, it should be free. Simple as that. Water.
I already know how people are going to respond to this. You stupid kid, not everything can be free. Somebody's got to make it. Not everything in life is free, commie. But you need to understand we're already paying for the labor that goes into making these things. But then on top of that, you also have to pay for the profit of some guy who didn't actually make the thing you're buying. Take medicine, for example. The pharmaceutical companies make trillions of dollars in profits, spend millions of dollars lobbying politicians. So when you go to Walgreens and you buy some medicine, only a fraction of the amount of money you pay for that medicine is going to be used in the production process of medicine. And a huge chunk of it will be going to lobbying the government to make sure that they never lower the price of medicine. This is why we should nationalize all the major industries and transition to a socialist mode of production, where basic necessities are free. And if you own a pharmaceutical company, you go work in a mine or something, I don't care. This is why we should nationalize all the major industries and transition.
Also, if you're so big on productivity, right, and production and, you know, human activity and work under capitalism specifically is the only source of value, then you should agree with that all the pharmaceutical shareholders who don't work, who just sit on their butts and collect dividends, should go work in a mine, and they'll produce more.
To a socialist mode of production.
Ah, yes, the infamous pharmaceutical companies control lobbyists who control the government argument, and your major idea is to cut out the middleman and let the government control all of our industries, because I would love for all of our industries to run just like the DMV. Doesn't that sound absolutely astonishing? Socialism has never, does never, and will never work. Period. Thank you for attending my TED Talk.
That's a very nice TED Talk, PragerU lady. Now past Eddie is going to ratio you into oblivion. Enjoy.
Okay, so first, the DMV isn't an industry. It provides a public service. And if the DMV was privately owned, your license would probably cost a lot more because someone would need to make a profit off of it. Industry refers to things like oil or steel, things we take out of the ground and labor on to turn into things that are useful. If you want an idea of what nationalized industry would look like in the US, you can look at Norway's oil fund. So Norway nationalized their oil industry, and all the money they make off of it goes into funding social programs. So whereas in the US, we have trillions of dollars going to people like the Koch brothers, in Norway, trillions of dollars are reinvested in the populace. This is what nationalized industry would look like at first in a transition to socialism, not like the DMV. And I'm not saying nationalized industry is a cure-all or the ultimate goal of socialists, but to say it's never worked is just hilarious, especially when comparing the US to Norway.
So yeah, obviously Norway is a social democracy. It's not an example of a socialist country, but it is a good example of nationalized industry, right? Nationalized industry within a capitalist country that made a ton of people's lives better, because industry is not the same thing as the DMV. Right? You're not handing out people licenses. You're not doing a public service, which people are still getting ripped off on at the DMV, because our government is a dictatorship of capital. It doesn't actually serve people. But as I said, if it was privately owned, your license would be even more expensive. But nationalized industry is different because there's something that's actually being produced. Right? Industries are the core of our economy, the core of our real economy, the material base of our society. They produce the necessary means of subsistence. So if you nationalize these, not only can you give the workers a lot more control within those industries, the workers who know those industries the best, who have spent their whole lives working day in and day out in those industries, but you can reinvest the surplus of those industries in building them up, expanding them, offering more jobs, more workers' benefits, or paying for social programs like healthcare and stuff like that, as Norway and the social democracies have done. So you can't just say nationalization would make everything the DMV and therefore it's bad, which is why my video responding to this PragerU lady got so many more likes than this PragerU lady's video responding to me. Owned. Take the L, Dennis. Your money can't save you from the power of Marxist arguments.
You guys, I made it on PragerU. They posted that video on their Instagram page where this person compares nationalized industry to the DMV, a public service that makes you take a test to get a license. I think they might be sharing this video because I've been relentlessly taunting them about how I ratioed them on TikTok with the video I stitched this with. Why doesn't everyone just go like that video and we'll just dunk on them some more? Also, Steve said I want to play in mommy's basement and play video games and live off someone else all day. I wrestled in the Olympic trials qualifier tournament last weekend. Steve, what have you ever done? And no, it wasn't held in my mom's basement. You probably typed this from your mom's basement, you loser. Steve. I'm going to sleep now in my bed that I bought with the money I made from my job. All right, so now.
Gosh, I used to be able to say anything on TikTok. That would get taken down in like 2 seconds now. Like, you were mean to Steve, community guidelines violation. Your account is permanently banned, and we're going to incinerate all your videos. And the only videos up on TikTok anymore are like that PragerU lady. right? So my video's responding to her, ratioing her, getting way more traction than her video, is gone forever. And all that's left are these videos, you know, defaming me and attacking me. It's so gross. Oh, well, I don't care. But it is annoying. You owned him, Omega lol. Thank you. So yeah, there's another video in our series about the top videos about communism on YouTube. All I did was search communism, and that was one of the first ones that came up. So now we've hit Jordan Peterson. Let me see. Let's just Google, or let's just YouTube search communism together. For sure, we've done the Jordan Peterson video with 1.2, 1.3 million views. Now we've done this, the video about communist TikToks. Here's a short one. We'll have to watch that one eventually. Oh, yes, and Andrew Tate. That was the other one we did. So now we've hit 3 of these, 3 of the most popular videos about communism on YouTube. Why I left the left, my woke university. Oh, this girl's a left the left lady? Now I'm kind of interested in seeing why. Actually, I'm not interested. She's just going to say that liberalism is socialism, and that's why she left the left. And they're all just a bunch of crazy wokes. And ooh, what's this? Superpower, 100 years of communism in China. Incredible success story. Looks like something about China that's actually true. Wow, shout out to whoever made this. Spooky Scary Socialist also has so much. There's so many views on this video. That was one of the first videos I watched that got me to be a tanky. Tanka. Does Midwestern Marx have any plans to replicate or replace them since they are talking heads for the Democrats? Who? Oh. Oh, I see who you're talking about. Oops. Shouldn't have clicked that one. Just kidding. I'm a member of CPUSA, and I obviously have, if you know me and you know the Midwestern Marx theoretical line, you know we have deep disagreements with CPUSA, right? And with their stance on stuff. But, you know, I don't agree with like trying to infiltrate the party or just trying to do like a hostile takeover. And, you know, I also think CPUSA is the party with the deepest history and the most resources in the US by far. And like, it's officially recognized by like the Communist Party in China and international Communist Party. So it's got that internationalist support. So just because the party is flawed, you know, doesn't mean I think we should abandon it. I think we should go into it and fix it, but do so democratically, you know, do so by organizing, you know, real sections of worker power within CPUSA chapters and then running for leadership positions and, you know, advocating to change the policies or advocating, you know, for abolishing certain policies or, you know, even I don't know, any changes to the party that people want to see. I want to be careful what I say, but you know, there's a way to go about changing things for the better and regaining democratic centralism and real, you know, communist Marxist Leninist principles within the party that we believe will lead to, you know, successful organizing. So yeah, got to be careful what I say there, but Midwestern Marx does not have plans to like create our own party right now. No, I mean, that wouldn't even do anything, guys. I'm sorry. I hate to say it, but we don't have enough people. We don't have enough people on the ground right now. There are already like 8 million bajillion parties in the US. You know, if Midwestern Marx starts our own party, it'll be at a point when we have like, you know, 3 million followers or something, right? When we built this real base of support and when we have real, you know, operations of like community and workplace organizing on the ground. Like if we, had the resources and the labor to do something like the Black Panther Party's breakfast programs right now, but we don't. We could get there, we could get close, but right now our purpose needs, the best function that we can serve based on the amount of resources and money and labor that we have available, which is largely, just the labor of people like me, Noah, Carlos, and Mitch, and the rest, Kyle, is, not enough to like form a real revolutionary party in this country. So I just don't think that's an option right now. But I, wouldn't rule out any options in the future for sure. And, the one of the things I've wanted to do or been thinking more about is maybe running for office. Maybe running for office as a CPUSA candidate if they'd let me, or running for office just to get the word out about socialism, communism, and Midwestern Marx. And then I think that could lead to some more fruitful organizing efforts on the ground. But shout out to all our $10 patrons and $10 to $15 YouTube members and Twitch subscribers, by the way, everyone. Today's not one of the streams where I'm going to list off every one of them. I'll do that next stream, but I will give a shout out to everyone, say thank you, making our project possible. Oops. I'm trying to pull up your video, Jacob. Anyone got any real funny like Yeonmi Park videos? Eddie Liger.
Hello. A few of you guys have sent me.
Oh, Hakeem reacted to the same person. She was pretty smug, wasn't she? I just wasn't in a real angry mood today. I wasn't in the mood where she was really annoying me with her smugness. I thought this video was going to piss me off, but it didn't too bad. It's interesting that Hakeem responded, though. I'll have to watch that at some point. Hakeem, I love Hakeem. What's poppin', B? Got some good Yeonmi Park videos for me? Bet. Send them over. I'm ready for it. Or whatever. Defector videos, whatever you want. I like him so much. I like Hakeem, too. He's probably my favorite. I do like Second Thought. I just feel like JT's videos are tailored more towards beginners. Hakeem's videos are theoretical. Hakeem's videos are like what I feel like Marxist-Leninist content in the modern era. Like when I saw his videos, I'm like, this is what Marxist-Leninist YouTubers should be. Like, this is what it should be. Like, this is what we should be doing. And obviously we need to expand on that now, and it needs to evolve and develop and get even better from that and, hit different angles. And find new ways to expand. But Hakeem's pretty great. Oh, not her. Another defector. Sweet. Whoever you got, I'm all about it. She keeps appearing on comedy podcasts. Yeah, I was talking about that earlier, like Andrew Schulz. She was on the Andrew Schulz podcast, and they're just like cracking jokes. It's like, this is how entertainment media in the U.S. is so successful in brainwashing people and doing imperialist propaganda. Because what's more, what has more of an influence on a kid or, a young 20-year-old than, a comedian that they love propping up this Yeonmi Park lady? There are a lot of young people who listen to that podcast and they just think it's funny and then they think it's all jokes. They don't realize they're being indoctrinated with a neoliberal ideology. And Joe Rogan was Yeonmi on Joe Rogan? She might have been. Sometimes I hold out hope that Joe won't be that stupid, but he always likes to prove me wrong. Yep. Yeonmi Park went on Joe Rogan. I don't even know how she can spew BS on these podcasts for a while because they ask her follow-up questions, and sometimes you can just tell that her stories are filled with holes. I interviewed a North Korean who wished he could join the military in the South so he'd have more in common with his peers. Interesting. It's also interesting that the South has mandatory military service still. Have you reacted to any infographic show nonsense? Yeah, like all of their. Every time I react to them, it goes viral. But viral by the standards of our YouTube, which are not the same as our TikTok, where things just tend to blow up all the time. Like we've reacted to Stalin worse than Bill Gates, Mao, evil butcher of China, infographics on Venezuela. Ooh, this would be an interesting video to watch at some point. Yeah, infographics is bad. You just think you're getting this cute little like bite-sized history. You know, you'd think it would be all fact-based, but it's so ideological. It's so ideological. It's so biased. It's so bad. I don't know if infographics has done any other good propaganda videos lately, but we can try and find one. What if North Korea launched a nuclear bomb minute by minute? Some of their videos are just like weird. And some of their videos like this, FBI and CIA, how do they compare? Just make me think that this is like a CIA account. Like this is actually run by intelligence agencies. What will happen if Russia invades Ukraine? That's interesting. Like a lot of them are just like military reports. The US versus the world, who would win? Like I guess we're moving closer to this nowadays. How we wouldn't be able to beat the whole world. Why is that even a question? I don't know. Have they not been doing a lot of socialism videos lately? How cruel is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
At 34 years old, Kim Jong-un is one of the youngest world leaders alive today, and he's certainly by far the most infamous. But what makes him so terrifying? Today, we'll take a look at some of the cruelest things he's done. In this episode of the infographic show, how brutal is Kim Jong-un? In 2011, the world was formally introduced to Kim Jong-un, the third dynastic ruler of North Korea since 1950. Kim's cruelty started almost as soon as he assumed power. Faced with the specter of a possible coup from within the ranks of the nation's top political and military elite, Kim Jong-un immediately began a political purge that is rumored to have killed dozens of senior officials. In his bid to consolidate power and prevent any challenge to his authority, he even went so far as to have his own uncle executed, and years later, paranoia concerning his half-brother led him to dispatch assassins to Kuala Lumpur in 2017.
I told you, if you Google it, according to Western corporate media, Kim Jong-un has killed all of his aunts and uncles, every single one of them. He had them all executed. A lot of them showed up, you know, a few months later or a few years later, which is just Juche Necromancy in action. Kim Jong-un killing people just to raise them back from the dead. But yeah, that proves it. He's a dictator, killed all his aunts and uncles.
But political purges are simply par for the course concerning Kim's cruelty. His real crimes against humanity are committed on a daily basis against his own citizens. Wait until you hear about the laws they must follow and the penalties they incur for breaking them. The hallmark of North Korean cruelty is known as the Three Generations Rule, established in 1972 by Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather. The Three Generations Rule mandates that any serious crime warrants punishing not just the offender, but 3 generations of his or her family as well. This is, according to Kim Il-sung, the only way to exterminate the seed of evil completely. What this means is that in North Korea, if your father committed a grave crime against the state, you and your children would also be sent to a prison camp alongside him for the rest of your life.
I don't know what, and obviously no. Obviously not everybody who commits a crime the next 3 generations are just thrown in prison. How would that even work? Right? What, are these people having babies in prison and then their babies are kept in prison? Or, you know, is it people who have children and then they commit a crime and their children, when they turn 18, they're thrown into prison? How would this even be organized? It doesn't make any sense. I forgot what I was going to say now. What was I going to say? Gosh dang it. Oh, the unicorn made me think of this. A lot of these stories, you know, like there probably is some rule in the DPRK. I'm not familiar with what this stems from, but there probably is some rule about how, like, if a father commits a crime, you know, there's some things that have to be done to make sure his kids are taken care of, to make sure that they're supported economically and that they have education and things that won't let them, you know, go down the same path. Because a lot of these propaganda stories are taken from things that are real. So you see here, he's saying, someone once told me I'm delusional. I almost feel like I am a unicorn. Then I had them executed. So this is making fun of a story that U.S. media reported that said Kim Jong-un had discovered a unicorn, right? They claimed that Kim Jong-un was saying he discovered a unicorn. It was real, and the U.S. media was using this to mock Kim Jong-un and mock the DPRK. But as Susie Kim, Rutgers professor, points out in this excellent presentation called Dispelling Myths About North Korea, that's actually not what happened at all. There was an ancient cave found in South Korea across the demilitarized line that had like a unicorn creature carved into it, which shows that it shows that there was some ancient civilization connected to the DPRK and the North Korean people that was in this region, that lived in this region and had a civilization in this region. And the fact that they carved a unicorn into this cave showed that they had been there and they had lived there. That was what was reported by the DPRK officials. The U.S. media took that and said that Kim Jong-un, said that he discovered a unicorn. So they take something real, a real, rational, normal story, and they turn it into something insane. If somebody gets convicted of a crime, if they steal a Snickers bar, their kids and their grandkids will be in a labor camp for life.
A prison camp alongside.
Don't ask us for evidence or proof.
Him for the rest of your life. The free generations rule is supposed to be only for great offenses, but testimony from North Korean defectors and escapees shows that it has been enacted for offenses from political dissent to
testimonies from North Korean defectors and escapees. The testimonies that haven't been taken seriously by scholars for years and years and years because there's a defector industry in South Korea created by the South Korean ruling capitalist class, the CIA, and the South Korean intelligence agencies. Yes, we can definitely trust them.
Failing to remove dust from a portrait of any of the Kim ruling family members. Conditions inside the labor camps are purposefully cruel as well, with prisoners being fed barely enough to stay alive and forced to try to catch rats and insects to eat. Survivors have described 12-hour hard labor workdays, 7 days a week, with people.
Survivors have described this. That's every single source, right? When we criticize the defector industry, one of the things that people are bound to say is, well, not all the stories about North Korea are fake, right? Some of them got to be true. And if any of these crazy stories are true, the place is, a dictatorship. It's horrible. And not to say the DPRK is perfect, of course, not to say there aren't real criticisms that can be made. But a lot of these stories are so absurd and so detached from reality. And it's because they all stem from this defector industry where, like I said, people are brokered out of North Korea. They're tricked by South Korean intelligence into leaving. And then, the main way for them to make money is to come up with the craziest stories they can about the DPRK that'll get picked up by tabloids or TV shows or the West, corporate media in the West. And those are the ones who really make it, the celebrity defectors like Yeonmi Park, who just tour America and tell these stories about the DPRK. But every source in these infographics video is defectors and survivors. When these defector testimonies haven't been taken seriously in years and years and years. And one of the funniest things I heard was a liberal told me that, you have to believe survivors. So therefore you have to believe these sources that haven't been taken seriously by academics forever. In reference to sexual assault survivors, and believing their testimonies. They said that we also have to believe the testimonies of Yeonmi Park and the North Korean defectors. One of the most liberal arguments I think I ever done heard.
Becoming physically stunted and deformed from the unceasing work. Beatings, torture, and rape are all commonplace in these camps, and there exists no possibility of parole. North Korea's constitution technically guarantees freedom of the press, but the state does not allow any foreign or non-state-sponsored media to operate.
Their constitution involves freedom of the press. I'm surprised they even said that, right? Which is crazy. Not every socialist country has had freedom of the press as a founding principle. There has been open debate and criticism, but, they always leave a little room for censorship of fascist ideology or whatever. But North Korea has freedom of the press, and they're like forced to admit that before they say that, no, they don't follow it. They don't follow it like us in the U.S., where social media oligarchs and people like Rupert Murdoch dominate the news media.
It is therefore technically illegal to operate any independent press, and this is a law that Kim's North Korea enforces strictly. All foreign media is completely banned from the nation, making it illegal to watch foreign TV shows or movies, listen to foreign radio or music, or even read foreign books. While North Korea does have a state-run version of...
What do you mean you can't have independent media? There are literally U.S. corporations and U.S. government officials freaking out because there are North Korean vloggers who are getting popular. There are people in North Korea producing vlogs and just showing what their everyday life is like, and the U.S. propagandists are like, no. You're going to ruin our illusion. You're going to ruin our myth about North Korea. So it's the opposite. It's the capitalist ruling class scrambling to ban and suppress anyone like Midwestern Marks, who recently had our 8th TikTok account banned, who will tell you the truth about North Korea, or even, real North Korean citizens producing their own media. And there's going to be more, there's going to be more and more of that stuff with time. There's, a lot of vloggers in China who just show what everyday life is like. They, show what the train station's like. They show what the city is like, and they show that there aren't any homeless people and that everything's clean and well kept up and well taken care of. And it shows what socialism has been able to build and bring the people in China. So there's going to be more and more and more of that, where Americans are just going to see vlogs and everyday life is better in socialist countries than it is in capitalist countries for the working masses. And the capitalists are going to scramble to ban it, of course. So, yeah, there's also a South Korean reality show that has defector sensationalized. Yeah, we discussed that earlier, but thank you. Here, Now on My Way, Coming to See You, or whatever it is. Now on My Way to See You, I think it's called. Now on My Way to Meet You. Yeah, Now on My Way to Meet You. This is the defector TV show. So, if you get tricked into leaving the DPRK and you're in South Korea, which has this destitute, cutthroat capitalist economy, you're going to be tempted. You're going to be trying to get on this show by telling the most sensationalized stories you can. And that's how we get these ridiculous infographics videos about the DPRK. All right, everyone, I'm tired. It's 12 o'clock midnight where I'm at. I'm going to have to call it a day for the stream. I'm glad you hung out with me tonight. I'm glad I got a chance to hop on and do this stream. I wasn't sure if I was going to get a chance. I was grinding on my homework, but got enough of it done and got to do the stream. Thanks to all the super chatters. Thanks to the moderators. You know who you are. My brain is running out of steam. So I'm going to just end the stream now before I say anything silly. But much love, everybody. Oh, I've been playing the video game Dragon Quest VIII lately. It's pretty sick. And I might start doing some gameplay live streams on our TikTok. So, yeah, follow our new TikTok at Edby Liger. And I don't know, there's another one. I can't remember the name of the backup, but either way, solidarity, everyone. Peace.